My name is Sophia Bennett, and I'm about to tell you about the night a lukewarm cup of coffee, a crumpled $20 bill, and an old man with trembling hands changed my entire life. Not in the way you see in movies. There was no swelling soundtrack rising at just the right moment. No slow-motion shot of my hand reaching into my wallet. No applause, no witnesses, nothing at all. Just the familiar hiss and sputter of an old coffee machine in the corner, and the faint sound of rain tapping the window glass. Simply happened. Quietly. Simply. The way that the most important things in life tend to happen, without warning, without fanfare, in silence, when you're not paying attention, when you're just living your life and haven't yet realized you're stepping into a moment that will stay with you forever. But before I tell you about that night, I need you to understand who I am. Not the name on my military ID, not the number in my personnel file, not the badge on my chest or the rank that follows my name on the duty roster. I want to tell you about the real person behind that uniform, a 24-year-old girl from a small town in the Georgia flatlands, who walked into an ordinary diner that night with aching feet, shoulders locked tight after 12 hours in front of a screen, and a heart growing slowly numb to the steady rhythm of life on a military base. That's the person I want you to know. Not the soldier. Sophia. I grew up in Valdosta, Georgia. A town that, if you haven't heard of it, that's fine because most Americans haven't either. Population around 50,000, known for its pine trees in summer so hot the asphalt goes soft under the afternoon sun. My dad was an electrician. My mom taught third grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from our house. We weren't rich, but we never went without. The kind of family where dinner always had everyone at the table, where the front door was locked by 10 o'clock, where everything big and small got talked through under the pale yellow light above the kitchen. I was an only child. That meant I was both coddled and heavily expected of. Those two things don't cancel each other out, they just create a particular kind of pressure that only children understand better than anyone. My mother wanted me to go to college, become a teacher or a nurse or anything that could answer the question, "What is your daughter studying?" at parent-teacher conferences. My father never said his expectations out loud. He never said anything important directly, but I could read them in the way he looked at me when I did something well, that quiet, warm pride he kept entirely to himself. I did well in school. Not the kind of well that gets you chosen to speak at graduation, but well, the kind of student teachers remember by name but can't point to a single standout achievement. I played sports, volleyball and short-distance track. And I loved both, not because I was particularly good, but because they left no room for unnecessary thought. You run, you jump, you spike the ball, and during that time your mind goes completely empty in the most beautiful sense of the word. At 18, I enrolled at a college in Savannah at my mother's urging. Business administration because I didn't know what I wanted and everyone said that degree made you employable. 3 years. 3 years sitting in cold lecture halls. Reading textbooks I couldn't understand why I needed to know. Passing exams I could get through but felt nothing looking at the grades. Not because I was lazy or unintelligent, but because I couldn't find a reason. A reason to study. A reason to stay. A reason to keep going. I needed something with real weight. Something where when you did it well, it felt important in the truest sense, not important because of grades or rankings, but important because it connected to something larger than yourself. I joined the United States Marine Corps at 21. My mother cried. Not from pride. Those tears would come later, years later, when she stood watching me receive a commendation and her hands trembled inside my father's. That day she cried from fear. Specific, real fear. She stood at the front door on a sweltering August afternoon, arms wrapped tight around my shoulders in that way only she knew how to do, not holding on to keep me there, but holding on to memorize me, as though she were trying to press my shape into the palms of her hands to carry with her. And I felt the small trembling in her chest travel through the fabric of her shirt and into my skin. My father said nothing. He just looked at me with an expression I still haven't fully decoded. A strange mixture of worry, pride, and perhaps something like the realization that his little girl no longer needed protecting in the way he had always imagined. He shook my hand. Firmly, the kind of handshake he only used with adults. And I understood that was how he said the things he couldn't put into words. Basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina, not hell. It was something worse than hell because at least hell is a place you're allowed to hate. Parris Island is a place where they take you apart piece by piece, every fragment of the self you thought you were, and put you back together as something else. Not worse. Not necessarily better. Just different. Harder where hardness is needed, softer in ways you wouldn't expect. 13 weeks. 69 days exactly. I counted every single one not because I wanted out, but because counting was the only way I could hold on to the feeling that time was still moving, that the world outside still existed at its own pace, that there was a life waiting for me on the other side of those barbed wire fences. Not my old life, I already understood enough to know I wouldn't be going back to that. A new life whose shape I hadn't yet seen. The first thing they taught us wasn't how to shoot, not how to march or tie knots. The first thing they taught, not through words but through every hour of every day, through exhaustion, through hunger and cold and heat and the loneliness of a crowd, was, you are no longer an individual. You are part of something much larger than yourself. Your name doesn't matter. Your emotions don't matter. Not because they have no value, but because they cannot be what drives your actions. The ego you spent 21 years building, piece by piece, it gets set down here, and when you leave, if you're strong enough, you'll be able to pick it back up. But it will no longer be the only thing that defines you. I didn't like that. Nobody did. But I understood it. And I understood why it was necessary. That's when I began to truly grow up. Not because I was transformed into something else, but because I learned something no classroom could ever teach. The difference between what you feel and what you choose to do. Not suppressing emotion, but refusing to let emotion command action. 3 years after graduating Paris Island, following one transfer and several months at a smaller base in North Carolina, I was assigned to Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk. The joke among the people who know it. The place where sea wind blows salt in your face 9 months of the year and coal dust from the ship furnaces blows in your face for the other 3. Not the most beautiful city in the world. No picturesque sunsets or tree-lined autumn roads. But it had the ocean. And for me, the ocean was enough. The briny smell of seawater mixed with engine oil from the warships at dock. The distant sound of foghorns in the early morning. The feeling of wind coming straight off the Atlantic hitting your face without asking permission. I served in Logistics Support Unit 4, doing work that most civilians, if you described it to them, would nod politely at and silently think was boring. Supply management, equipment inventory, coordinating transport of materials and gear between units. Nothing glamorous. Nothing Hollywood. But I loved that work. Loved it in that particular way you only feel when you're doing something that fits your mind exactly, like water finding its right container. In logistics, everything has to line up. Numbers have to be precise down to the single unit. Deadlines have to be met because a unit without adequate supplies at the right time isn't just inconvenienced. It's the difference between mission success and failure. The weight of that responsibility, even when few could see it, even when nobody applauded, was what let me sleep well at night. When you know your work matters, even though no one tells you so, that's a kind of peace money can't buy. My room in the barracks was the size of a shoebox. Just enough for a single bed against the wall, a desk, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the parking lot. Nothing decorating the walls but a photo of my parents in a plastic frame on the desk and a road map of the United States I'd pinned up on day one, with red dots marking all the places I wanted to visit when I had long leave. In the evenings after work, I walked. That habit started at Paris Island. There we marched so much that our feet stopped distinguishing between voluntary walking and ordered marching, and I never broke it. Every night, about an hour, I'd walk the area near the base, sometimes stepping out through the gate and down Shoreline Road. It was how I talked to myself without words, letting the day's worries and frustrations evaporate with each step, letting my mind return to something cleaner, quieter. And on those evening walks, I often stopped in at Millie's place. Millie's all-day diner sat at the corner of Shoreline Road and Prospect Avenue, in a one-story whitish-gray building so old it looked like part of the natural landscape, as though it had been there before the base was built, before the road was paved, before anything else. The red sign on the roof had once glowed neon blue but now only dimly lit up at night, and the words "all day" had faded to near invisibility. Nobody cared. People didn't come here for the sign. Inside. 8 tables, a high counter with 10 red vinyl stools worn smooth from years of use. Low ceiling with bell-shaped lamps casting warm yellow light. Old wood floors that creaked in familiar spots only regulars knew to step around. And in the back corner, the old commercial coffee machine, silver gone to pewter, with its steady hissing and gurgling like the heartbeat of the place, a sound that anyone who'd sat there enough times carried home inside them. Millie Mildred Hargrove by birth, though no one had ever called her that, was short and solid, platinum haircut neat and trim, bright green eyes sharp in the way that elderly people sometimes are after decades of watching people come and go. She always wore a green apron with 2 large front pockets, one for pens, one for order pads, and she moved through the narrow space of the diner with the certainty of someone who'd walked the same floor thousands of times. She knew every regular's name, knew what they drank, what they ate, where they sat, knew who needed to be asked how they were doing and who needed to be left alone. She never asked me personal questions, though I was certain she recognized I was military, even on the nights I came in looking more worn than usual. She just set the coffee cup down in front of me, sometimes add a small cookie I hadn't ordered, and move on to the next table. That's the best kind of care, the kind that needs no explanation and expects no acknowledgement. Major Brian Thornton had been commanding my unit for 2 years when I arrived at Norfolk. Before I met him, I'd already heard about him. The military is an environment where a commander's reputation travels ahead of their body. People said Thornton was good. People said he was strict. People said his unit always made its targets on time. All of that was true. He was good in the technical sense of the word, knew procedure as well as he knew his own hand, understood the military system down to every small clause, handled administration quickly and accurately. But there are things the rumor mill doesn't tell you. Things you have to experience yourself. In my first week with the unit, I attended the Monday morning briefing. 23 people. Thornton stood at the head of the table in a uniform without a single crease, hair slicked back without a strand out of place, the previous week's report in hand. He read each item. His voice, low, flat, without inflection, had no emotion in the sense that you couldn't find it no matter how carefully you looked. And during that hour-long meeting, I watched the people around me. They sat straight. They took notes. They answered when addressed, precise, brief, nothing extra. No one asked an unnecessary question. No one smiled. Not because they didn't know how to smile. I'd already seen many of them laughing and chatting normally in the hallway. But in this room during this hour, something in the air made smiling feel like an unnecessary risk. That was the first time I recognized it. Discipline and fear look the same from the outside, but they feel completely different. Private First Class Carlos Lopez was the first real friend I made at Norfolk. He was from San Antonio, Texas. Grew up in a neighborhood that, in his words, teaches you early that smiling is the best way to survive. He was 22 when I met him, baby-faced with dark eyes that laughed easily, and he had an innate ability to put people around him at ease, not by talking a lot or trying hard, but just by being present in the way that some lucky people are. He was the first one to talk to me naturally in the mess hall, the one who showed me the shortcuts around the base, and the one who never asked why I walked alone in the evenings but sometimes just said, "You going out? I'll come along." Something in the way Lopez approached life. Easy, unguarded, ready to laugh at himself before laughing at anyone else. Reminded me of things I was afraid had been worn away in me. In my second month with the unit, I witnessed the incident that changed the way I saw Thornton forever. Lopez submitted an incorrect inventory. Not seriously incorrect. One number in a list of over 300 items entered wrong. The warehouse held 42 units. The report said 41. 1 unit. An ordinary typing error that anyone doing data entry long enough will make at least once. Thornton caught it during his weekly review. And instead of addressing it privately, the approach any experienced manager knows is more effective, he waited until the Monday meeting, called Lopez to the front of the entire unit, and began his analysis. Not an analysis aimed at correction. An analysis aimed at documentation. He stood next to the whiteboard, report in hand, and went through each error, though there was really only one, with the calm voice of someone doing arithmetic. No shouting. No reddening of the face. No burst of anger you could understand and forgive. Just that flat, cold voice, and every word fell into the silent room like small stones dropped one by one. I sat in that room and watched Lopez. He stood straight in the way that people can only stand straight when they're using every last ounce of willpower to keep from showing what they're feeling. His ears went red from the back of his neck outward, the most honest involuntary signal the human body gives, impossible to fake or suppress. His jaw tightened, released, tightened again. After the meeting, he didn't speak to anyone for 2 hours. I sat beside him in the supply room that afternoon and we worked in silence. I didn't ask. He didn't say. But I was there. And I believe that mattered the way silence sometimes matters more than words. Walking back to my room that evening, I thought about what Thornton had done and what I felt watching it. I didn't have language for it then. Just a sense that something was wrong. Wrong at a more fundamental level than just, that wasn't handled well. But I didn't yet know what to call it. I would learn to name it later. It was a Wednesday, the second week of November. I know because Wednesday was the weekly report day, the supply status summary and next week's inventory schedule I had to submit to my superiors by 4 in the afternoon. That particular week was especially bad because the base's logistics management system had been down since morning. Couldn't log in, data freezing, every action taking 3 times as long as normal. I'd had to rebuild the report from scratch twice because of data loss. And Thornton, despite the outage being an established fact that the entire office knew about, still required the report on time at 4. I submitted it at 3:58. I left the office just before 8 in the evening, after more than 12 hours at a screen. Eyes dry and stiff in that familiar way of a too-long workday. Right shoulder aching dully. I had a habit of enduring rather than adjusting my posture, and after 12 hours of bad posture the shoulder would remember it all week. The November evening air was cold and damp, a light wind from the sea carrying that familiar salt smell. I hadn't planned to stop at Millie's. I just started walking, let my feet lead, and my feet knew the way to Millie's better than I did. When I pushed the door open, the small bell above it rang. That sound, every time I heard it I breathed a little easier, as though something in me automatically relaxed at the recognition of a familiar place. The diner wasn't busy. Wednesday nights in November don't draw much of a crowd. 2 men in construction clothes sat at the far corner table, food in front of them, conversation going steadily. A young couple sat by the window looking out at the light drizzle, hands intertwined. And at the counter, sitting alone on the third stool from the door, was the old man. I chose a stool 2 seats away from him, ordered a black coffee, and looked out the window out of habit. The old man was around 70, maybe 75. Hair white as cotton, falling softly across his forehead in the natural line of hair that hasn't been carefully combed back. Skin weathered the way someone's skin is after decades outdoors. Not the brown of vacation sun, but the color of working sun, sea, wind, time. The lines on his face weren't lines of worry or frowning. They were lines of someone who had laughed much and looked at much and lived much. He wore a navy blue plaid flannel shirt, khaki trousers, and old brown leather shoes polished carefully. That small detail caught my attention because people polish old shoes not because the shoes need polishing, but because they were taught that you take care of what you have. In front of him was a nearly finished plate of scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast with one still untouched, and a coffee cup down to the dregs. He sat with a straight back even though no one was watching. The posture of someone who has sat up straight long enough that it's become natural rather than deliberate. I didn't pay him further attention. That night I just wanted to drink coffee and watch the rain and let my mind go empty for a while. Then I heard Millie's voice. Not loud. Just that careful tone people use when they want to be polite in an uncomfortable situation. Sir, it looks like your card was declined. Do you have another one? I didn't turn right away. But I listened. The sound of the old man searching through his wallet. Leather on leather, the soft rustle of paper, the small zip of a compartment. Then silence. The kind of silence that holds a great deal within it. Oh! His voice was low, quiet, and there was something in that brief, oh, that made me turn. I'm sorry, Miss Millie. It seems I didn't bring enough cash. He was holding an old brown leather wallet, open, and his hands wide, sinewy, the hands of someone who had used them for hard work for many years, trembled slightly in the way that can't quite be controlled. Inside the wallet were just a few small bills, not enough for the meal. On his face was something I recognized immediately because I had seen it before, on Lopez's face during that Monday meeting. Shame. Not the loud kind, hands flying up to cover the face. The quiet kind, held in check by dignity, the way a man who has lived long enough knows that dignity is the last thing you allow anyone to take from you. His eyes didn't look down, but something in them withdrew the way light fades through frosted glass. Millie was looking at him with genuine discomfort. She wasn't unkind, Millie was never unkind, but this was a situation without a ready-made script for handling. The young couple by the window had turned to look. The 2 construction workers had stopped their conversation mid-sentence. I sat still for 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds, I've thought about them a lot afterward. Not thinking about whether I did right or wrong, but thinking about what happened inside me during those 3 seconds. There was no calculation, no question of should I, or what will people think. Just one very simple thing lighting up in my head, clear as a short declarative sentence. No person, not this old man, not any young person, not anyone, should have to stand in front of others and feel ashamed because they can't pay for a meal. And if I could prevent that from happening without any other reason, I would prevent it. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out the $20 bill. All the cash I had that night, the money I planned to use for coffee and the walk home, stood up and walked to the counter. "Miss Millie," I said quietly, setting the bill on the counter, "put his and mine together on this, please." I said it quietly enough that only Millie could hear. Not because I was afraid of anyone knowing, but because the old man didn't need to hear me say it. He didn't need to see himself as the object of charity. He didn't need to carry any additional emotional weight home that night. If he didn't see, if he didn't know exactly what had happened, the moment would pass cleanly, and he could finish his dinner without taking home the feeling of owing anyone anything. I turned back to my stool, sat down, looked at my coffee cup. "Young lady." His voice was low, firm. Not the voice of someone offering thanks or someone flustered. Something else in it. I turned. He was looking at me. And it was a particular kind of look, not a look of gratitude, not a look of awkwardness. Observation. Assessment. The look of someone who has studied enough people over enough years to know what they're seeing, and who was seeing something worth noting. "What's your name?" "Sophia," I answered. "Sophia Bennett." He nodded once. Decisive. The way you confirm an important piece of information. "Thank you, Sophia Bennett." I smiled, brief, light, then turned back to my coffee. Finished it, left a tip for Millie, pulled on my jacket and walked out the door. The rain had stopped. The wet road reflected the streetlights in long shimmering yellow streaks. I walked back to the base in the cold wind, thinking about tomorrow's report, about the end-of-week inventory plan, about needing to call home to my mother on the weekend. I didn't think much about the old man. What I'd done was done, and as far as I was concerned that night, the story was over. I was wrong about that. The following 2 weeks passed in the familiar rhythm of life on base. A regularity so steady that sometimes you lose your sense of time. The days flowing into one another with no clear line between them. Monday morning briefing. Thornton at the head of the table with his flat machine-like voice. Tuesday supply room inventory. Wednesday reports. Thursday cross-unit coordination meeting. Friday weekly review. Weekends relatively free but not truly free because you were still on base, still in uniform, still on active schedule. Around day 10, I was sitting in the supply room working in the afternoon when Lopez came in. I heard his footsteps before I saw his face. Lopez walked fast and purposefully. His boots on the concrete floor had their own rhythm. But that day the footsteps were heavier than usual. He stood in the doorway, a sheet of paper in his hand. His face had been rearranged into normal, but not quite successfully. "Bennett, you okay?" I asked directly because Lopez was someone I'd learned was better asked straight. He shrugged the way people shrug when they want to say, "Not really, but I'm trying to be." Written up. Weekly plan submitted 2 hours late. I looked at him. The network went down this morning. Everyone submitted late. Yeah. He looked at the paper in his hand. But I'm the only one formally documented. Silence between the two of us. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling. I knew he was telling the truth. I knew because I'd also submitted late that day. The entire unit had submitted late because the system failure was real, confirmed by IT. But Lopez was the one chosen. And I knew why, even if I didn't dare say it out loud then. Because Lopez was the person Thornton had decided needed to be kept under control. And every opportunity was another nail driven into the coffin of his confidence. "You want to get dinner at Millie's tonight?" I asked. He looked at me then smiled. Small. But real. Yeah. That's how we got through days like that one. Not with stirring words of encouragement or plans for revenge. Just dinner, coffee, and the simple fact of being there for each other. Day 14 at 9:45 in the morning, the phone on my desk rang. "Corporal Bennett, you are required to report to Conference Room A, second floor of the command building, at 1400 hours today." The caller's voice was flat and colorless. "For what reason?" I asked. No additional information, Corporal. I hung up. Sat still holding the receiver. Conference room A. Command building. Not the unit office. Not the regular meeting room. I tried to remember if I'd done anything wrong in the past 2 weeks. Reports submitted on time. No feedback indicating errors. Inventory complete. Conduct no issues I knew of. But no issues I knew of and genuinely no issues aren't always the same thing. I couldn't eat much of my lunch. Drank 2 coffees. At 1:45, redressed my uniform carefully. Buttons fastened bottom to top the way we'd been taught, collar checked, sleeves smoothed, and walked to the command building. The hallway of the command building was different from the hallways of the ordinary buildings on base in ways that were hard to describe but easy to feel. Cleaner not because it was mopped more often but because fewer people walked through it. Quieter not because of better insulation but because people who walked through it naturally stepped more softly. On the walls hung framed photographs, black and white and color images of generals spanning decades, unit banners folded carefully in glass cases, commendations and citations from eras I only knew through books. Out of old habit, I read the names on the photographs as I passed. Names attached to campaigns, decisions, historical moments. Outside conference room A, I stopped. Adjusted my collar one more time. Breathed in, breathed out. Knocked. Come in. I pushed the door open. Warm November afternoon light poured through the large window, casting a band of gold across the hardwood floor. A long conference table with black leather chairs around it. And at the head of the table, sitting perfectly straight with the posture of someone who had sat that way their whole life, was the old man. I recognized him in less than a second. Those eyes. That decisive nod. That white hair. But this time he wasn't wearing a plaid flannel shirt. He was wearing a full United States Marine Corps dress uniform, dark olive drab with all the insignia and badges and service ribbons that would take me an hour to read through. And on his shoulder boards, I saw them and stopped breathing for a moment. 4 gold stars. 4 stars. General. 4-star General. Thornton stood to one side, face expressionless, but his body stiffer than usual in the way I had learned was the sign of suppressed tension. I came to attention and saluted with full proper form. Corporal Bennett. His voice, that familiar deep voice, filled the room. At ease. I lowered my hand and adjusted my stance. At ease in this context still meant standing straight and looking straight, but with hands at my sides rather than behind my back. He studied me for a moment. That look. I had seen it at Millie's, but now in the full light of the conference room I could read more of it. It was the look of someone who had spent decades learning to read people. Not judgmental, not overly warm, just seeing. I am General Alexander Whitmore, he said. And I believe you recognize me. Yes, sir. The corner of his mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. You didn't recognize me at the diner. No, sir. Good. He nodded. Because if you had, I wouldn't be here today. General Whitmore was unhurried. He poured coffee from the carafe on the table, poured it himself without asking anyone, and settled back, both hands cradling the cup. That gesture, that small naturalness, made me notice one more thing about him. He never placed himself above the small conveniences that people usually ask subordinates to handle. Major Thornton. His voice shifted. Not louder, not harder, but something in the way he spoke the name made Thornton stand 2 centimeters straighter, if that were still possible. Sir. I have been in Norfolk for 3 days. He set the coffee cup down and looked up. Not 3 days sitting in an office reading reports. 3 days moving around talking with people, eating where the enlisted eat, sitting where they sit after hours. Thornton said nothing. Proper form. I spoke directly with 17 service members of various ranks in your unit. Not formal interviews. Just conversations. And I reviewed the unit file, the last 6 months of disciplinary records, and morale assessments from anonymous surveys. He paused. A deliberate pause, the kind that comes after years of standing in front of many people, when you know that silence at the right moment carries more weight than any word. In the past 6 months, your unit's rate of formal disciplinary action is 38% higher than the average for comparable units on this base. Morale scores from anonymous reports are in the bottom 30% base-wide. Transfer request rates have doubled compared to the same period last year. Thornton still said nothing. His jaw tightened slightly. Those numbers don't say you're technically deficient. You're not. The unit's mission completion record is at standard. You know how to do your job. He paused. But what those numbers do say is that your leadership style is producing something in this unit that is not strength. It's fear. And fear looks like strength from a distance. The unit complies, meets targets, no one talks back. But under genuine pressure, fear breaks. Trust does not. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning unit in the ceiling. You will be relieved of command for 30 days to participate in a leadership evaluation and development program organized by personnel. This is not a punishment. This is an opportunity. He looked directly into Thornton's eyes. The rest of your career, that's yours to decide. Sir, understood. Very well. You're dismissed. Thornton saluted, turned, walked out. The door closed with a soft click. Conference room and now held only 2 people. General Whitmore looked at me in silence for a moment. Not awkward silence. The silence of a man arranging his thoughts in the order he wanted them. Then he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Sophia. I sat. Back straight, hands on my thighs. Hearing my name spoken without my rank in this context created a strange feeling. Not more comfortable exactly, but different. As though he were talking to me as a human being, not to me as a corporal. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want a true answer, not the correct one. Yes, sir. Why did you do what you did at the diner that night? A simple question. But in the silence that followed it, I realized it wasn't simple at all. It was a question about the nature of an action, the why, not the how. I sat with the question for a moment before answering. Because I could see he was ashamed, I said. And I thought no person should have to feel that way over a meal. And if I could make that moment pass without him carrying extra weight home, I should. He looked at me. Not because I might have been someone important. Sir, at the time I saw an old man in a difficult spot. Nothing more. If you'd known I was a general, would you have done it? I thought about that honestly. I hope so. But I'm not sure I would have done it the same way. Maybe I would have done it more self-consciously, wanting to be seen doing it. And that's not what I want my actions to be. Something in his eyes changed. Not much, but it was there. You just described the difference between acting from character and acting for image, he said. And you're right that they are entirely different things, even when they look identical from the outside. He stood, walked around the table, and placed on the surface in front of me a sheet of paper bearing an official seal and his signature. I read it. A letter of commendation with my name, unit, and date. And a short paragraph I read twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Corporal Sophia Bennett is hereby commended for demonstrating outstanding integrity and leadership character through a voluntary, selfless, and recognition-free act. This action reflects the core values upon which the United States Marine Corps is founded: service, honor, and commitment. I sat still with the paper in front of me and felt something very difficult to describe. Not pride in the chest-swelling sense, but something quieter and heavier and more real. He sat back down and looked at me. Sophia, in 40 years of military service, I have met many people who were technically skilled, procedurally professional, and tactically capable. There is no shortage of such people. Our training system produces them by formula. He paused. What the system cannot produce, what only each individual can build or choose not to, is character. And character only shows itself when no one is watching. He looked directly into my eyes. Rank gives you the authority to give orders. Procedure gives you the tools. But character is what makes people want to follow you when they have the choice not to. He stopped, and in that pause I heard the wind outside the window, the distant sound of the base continuing its operations. Thornton has discipline. He has procedure. But he doesn't understand that discipline built on a foundation of fear will collapse the first time it is genuinely tested. Whereas discipline built on trust that your leader sees you, trust that they will be fair, trust that they stand alongside you rather than above looking down, that kind of discipline holds. He stood, motioned for me to stand as well. I'm not making you any promises about the future. Not because I don't care, but because what you need isn't for anyone to make you promises. What you need is to keep being the person you were that night at the diner. Even when no one is watching. Even when no one will know. Even when there's nothing to be gained. I came to attention and saluted. He returned the nod. All right, Corporal Bennett. Dismissed. I stepped outside. The Norfolk November sky was a pale gray, wind carrying salt from the direction of the harbor. I stood still for a moment on the steps of the command building, the commendation in my hand, looking out at the distant warships resting quietly at dock. Then I sat down on the steps, which I knew was improper while in uniform, and looked down at the paper. And I smiled. Not from elation or pride. The kind of smile that comes when you hear someone put into words something you've known for a long time but never had language for. The thing I had known since I was small, from the way my father shook hands with the elderly neighbor when he had no ride to the store, from the way my mother stayed after the school bell to help students who hadn't understood, treating it as simply what you did rather than as extra work, that thing now had a name. Character. Not because anyone is watching. Not because anything is to be gained. Simply because it is right. News of General Whitmore's visit and Thornton's suspension spread through the unit with the speed that important news always travels in the military, fast, underground, and unstoppable. Nobody knew the details. Nobody needed the details. What everyone knew was that Thornton was absent, and the atmosphere of the unit in that first week changed in ways that no metric could measure but everyone could feel. The Monday morning meetings continued. But the sound of conversation before meetings started was louder. Martinez asked questions in meetings that before he would have waited to ask afterward. Not challenging questions, just genuine ones from someone who wanted to understand more clearly. William started smiling in the mess hall, the smile I'd watched him hold back for months during working hours. Small things. But small things are always the first to change when pressure is eased. I was assigned acting coordination deputy while Thornton was absent. Not a promotion. Just a temporary assignment with a new list of responsibilities and very little additional guidance. The kind of task where you have to figure out how to do it yourself. The first unit meeting I ran, I stood at the head of the table and looked down at 20 familiar faces. Looking from that angle was completely different. I saw things I hadn't seen from below, the way Lopez gave a small nod when he agreed with something, the way Williams pulled at his ear when he was thinking, the way Martinez kept his pen ready but didn't write until he was certain the information mattered. I knew these people. Not their names and ranks. I knew who they were. I'm not going to pretend I have experience running things that I don't, I said, and heard my voice calmer than I expected. But I'll promise this. If anyone has a problem, tell me directly. Don't wait for a meeting. Don't go through formal channels first. Just tell me. I'll listen. No applause. No grand statements. Williams nodded once. That was all. But in it was something I understood, acceptance. Not acceptance because they had no choice. Acceptance because they chose it. 3 weeks after the meeting in Conference Room A, I went back to Millie's on a Friday afternoon. No particular reason. No plan. I was just walking in the afternoon and my feet led me there the way they always did. Millie set the coffee cup down in front of me. Without being asked, she knew. And stood still for a moment, which she rarely did. Honey, she said, her voice low like she was sharing something important. You know, the morning after you paid for that old man, he came back. I put down my cup. Early morning around 7 when we just opened. She looked at me with the eyes of someone remembering and still finding pleasure in the memory. He put a large bill right here on the counter, pointed at the room and said, "This morning any Marine who comes in, breakfast is on me." Then he left. No name. No explanation. I looked at her. 11 people came in that morning. She smiled wide, eyes brightening. And they just sat there asking each other who had paid for them. Asked me, I just smiled and said nothing. She gave a small shake of her head. Seeing them all sitting there, relaxed and enjoying themselves, it just made me happy. I sat with that for a while. I didn't know who those 11 people were. I didn't know what any of them were going through that day. Maybe someone was anxious before an inspection. Maybe someone had just received bad news from home. Maybe someone was simply tired in the way that soldiers get tired and nobody asks about. And that morning someone, no one knew who, decided their breakfast was a gift. Not because they knew who gave it. Not because they could thank anyone. Just someone had thought of them and done that. Sometimes all it takes is knowing that someone thought of you, even if you don't know who, even if there was no reason, to make that day feel a little lighter. I thought about it and understood. This is how genuine kindness actually spreads. Not by talking about it. Not by naming it. But by doing it, then letting it find its own way. A month later, Thornton came back to the unit after completing the evaluation program. I knew nothing of what happened during those 30 days. That was his private matter and I didn't try to find out. But I knew enough about the nature of such programs to understand that 30 days cannot completely change a person. No one is simple enough to change that completely. 30 days can open a door. What comes next is the individual's own choice. The first day he returned in the morning, Lopez and I were in the supply room. He appeared at the door, knocked lightly even though the door was open. "Bennett." "Lopez." We stood up and came to attention. "Stand down." His voice still low, still firm, but something in it less tight. Like a bowstring released rather than broken. He looked around the supply room, the neat shelves, the properly stacked boxes, the updated inventory sheets pinned to the board. "Unit still running well?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I answered. He nodded, looked at me for a moment. "I heard Bennett did good work coordinating while I was gone." "Sir, the unit did the good work. I just didn't get in their way." I didn't know why I said it that way, not a strategic display of humility but the true answer. Because it was the truth. The best thing I did in those 30 days was not prevent good people from doing things they already knew how to do. Thornton held my gaze for another moment. Something moved across his face. I couldn't read all of it, but I felt the weight of it. "Good." He nodded once more, then walked out. Lopez looked at me with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something they weren't sure they understood correctly. "Did he just kind of thank you in military style?" "I think so," I said. "That's something." "Yeah." I turned back to my desk. "But it's good." Thornton didn't become a completely different person. No one becomes a completely different person in 30 days, and I would not be honest if I said he had wholly changed. He was still demanding, still precise, still intolerant of carelessness. But the way he handled errors changed. No more public shaming, no more choosing the moment and the audience to maximize psychological impact. And that small change in method made a large difference to the atmosphere of the unit. Not perfect, but changing. And sometimes actively changing is more valuable than having already arrived at perfect, because changing is real while perfect is usually performance. 6 months after the night at Millie's, Lopez told me about something he had done. We were sitting in the mess hall after work, trays nearly empty in front of us, talking in the way two people who have known each other long enough talk, drifting from one subject to another with no need for transitions. "You know," he said, turning his spoon slowly, "last week a new kid joined the unit. Rodriguez, 19 years old, from El Paso, first time away from home. First day in the mess hall, he sat alone in the corner over there, looking at his phone but clearly not knowing what to do next. He paused. I went and sat with him. Got a few people from the unit to come over. We had dinner together, talked, showed him the basic ropes. He shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. I looked at him. Right, I said. It never is. Lopez looked at me for a moment, then understood. You're talking about me and you? And the old man at Millie's and me. And General Whitmore and 11 soldiers the next morning. I looked out the mess hall window. The way it keeps going, nobody forces it, nobody knows it, nobody's watching. One person sees something done and remembers that it can be done. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think General Whitmore knew it would keep going like that? I thought about it honestly. I don't think he cared whether it kept going, I said. I think he just did what was right that day and let it be. What happened after, that wasn't his purpose. Lopez nodded. That's the hardest thing, isn't it? Doing something good without caring about the outcome. That's the hardest thing, I agreed. 1 year after the night at Millie's, I received notification that I was being considered for early promotion to Lance Corporal, 6 months ahead of the normal timeline. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know whether General Whitmore's commendation had played any role in that decision, because if I began calculating which of my actions led to which results, I'd begin acting for results. And then everything would change, not for the better. What I know is that in that year I tried, not always successfully, not always consistently, to live by the thing that old General had put into words for me, behave correctly even when no one is watching. There were mornings I was too exhausted and was short with Lopez over things that weren't his fault. Times I stayed silent when I should have spoken, because the easier path felt more appealing than the right one. Moments I chose my own comfort over the inconvenience of doing what was right. But I know the difference. I know when I'm compromising and why. I know the thing that pulls in my chest when I choose wrong. And knowing the difference, truly knowing it, not just knowing it on paper, is where everything begins. What I learned from that night is not be kind and you'll be rewarded. That is the wrong lesson and a dangerous one, because it turns kindness into investment. What I learned is this: the moments of genuine freedom, the moments when no one is watching, when there's nothing to be gained, when there's no reason other than the choice itself, are the moments that define who you are. You are not measured by what you do when you're being watched. Everyone does the right thing when they're being watched. That's social survival instinct. You are measured by what you do in those 3 seconds, the 3 seconds when nobody knows, when nobody will know, and when there's nothing but you and your choice. And the most important judgment isn't from General Whitmore, or from the military system, or from anyone else. It's from yourself. What I learned about leadership from that night, and from the weeks that followed, is this: leadership is not a position. Leadership is action. And the most important acts of leadership are not the large ones under stage lights. They are the small decisions in the dark: how you speak to someone under your command when they make a mistake, how you stand beside a teammate when they need it, how you handle the gap between the power you have and the way you use it. Thornton had power. He used it to produce compliance. General Whitmore had power, far more of it, and he used it to build trust. And the difference doesn't lie in rank or procedure. It lies in character. In what you do when no one is watching and nothing compels you to do anything at all. My name is Sophia Bennett. I am a Lance Corporal in the United States Marine Corps, serving at Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia. My story has nothing grand in it. No battles, no one rescued, no great sacrifice. Just a 24-year-old girl from Valdosta, Georgia, sitting in a diner on a Wednesday night in November, who in 3 seconds chose to do the right thing because there was no reason other than that it was right. And those 3 seconds sent out ripples I will never see the end of. 11 soldiers got a free breakfast without knowing where it came from. A 4-star general remembered a corporal's name and decided that mattered. A major was made to look at himself and may, just may, be becoming better. A private first class sat down beside a new teammate and continued a circle that nobody had named. Those ripples don't belong to me. I just dropped a stone into the water. The water did the rest. If you're listening to this somewhere, in a car, on a run, washing dishes, lying in the dark before sleep, I want to tell you this not as a lesson or a piece of advice, just as something I know to be true. You'll have your own 3-second moments. Not at a diner with an old man. Your circumstances will be different. Maybe it's a moment deciding whether to say the true thing or the easy thing. Maybe it's a moment of choosing to stand beside someone who needs it or looking the other way. Maybe it's a moment of doing right when doing wrong is easier and no one will know either way. In those moments, there's no formula, no procedure, no one to tell you the right answer. Just you and your choice. And afterward, whatever you choose, you live with it. Not in the sense of regret or pride, but in a deeper sense, you become the person who made that choice. That choice, however small, however unseen, however unrewarded, it adds to the whole picture of who you are. And that whole picture, built from thousands of small moments no one ever saw, is your character. Rank gives you power, but character is what makes you worthy of it. Or more broadly, character is what makes you worthy of the life you are living. My name is Sophia Bennett, and that is everything I have to tell. Thank you for listening.